Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the first online ever information event that the Thyroid Trust have run. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Lorraine. I run the Thyroid Trust for my sins, along with a fantastic group of volunteers and backed up by an amazing group of trustees. We're a very new patient charity. We've been going for, well, we've completed our registration with the Charity Commission almost this time last year, last May. And we normally do regular events in London. And obviously we can't do that at the moment because of the present circumstances. And so this is our first ever online meeting, and as is the way of the universe, we've been having a bit of a technology panic just before we started, so please bear with us. I'm delighted that we have with us as our speakers today Brooke Lumisci, Dr. Brooke Lumisci from the MS Society, who's not a medical doctor, but she is very knowledgeable about evidence and science and using evidence for patient advocacy. And we also now have her fantastic colleague, Hannah West, who is Senior Campaigns Officer, also at the MS Society. So neither of them are going to know lots of things about thyroid disease, but what they are going to know lots about is how their organisations do patient advocacy and how they use evidence. And so I think we can learn a lot from them. And we've got a format for the meeting, which hopefully you've all seen the agenda, which we'll work through, and I'm going to try and chair things. After Brooke's talk and after we've had a bit of a discussion, I'm going to give an update on the advocacy work that we've been doing along with our partners, which hopefully will be useful. And I'm hoping we'll end up with a discussion that everybody can join in with. So I'll hand you over to Brooke now, if that's all right.
Hi everyone. So as Lorraine mentioned, my name's Brooke, and I work in the evidence team at the MS Society. And before that, I was an academic researcher on a number of conditions, but I did my PhD on lung cancer. As well as that, I am an Ask for Evidence ambassador for an organisation called Sense About Science, and they have a campaign called Ask for Evidence, which is meant to empower the public to ask for the evidence behind certain claims. I do have a presentation which I can share, but I will talk through it anyway, so if people can't see, that's absolutely fine. As I said, I'm an Ask for Evidence ambassador. This is Sense About Science. It's an organisation that's been going for over a decade now. They do a number of things in engaging scientists with the public and with decision makers, and they are piloting, leading on this Ask for Evidence campaign. Sorry, I'm just going to admit someone else to the meeting. So, as I said, the Ask for Evidence campaign, why can't I go forward? There we go. The Ask for Evidence campaign is part of making sure that people in the public can bring people who make claims in the public to kind of explain the evidence behind them. So policymakers, celebrities, social media influencers, businesses, and they have this page where you can go and they give you tools and resources to ask for evidence behind certain claims. And so they have a guide to asking for evidence where they go through how you can ask a company for evidence or how you can ask an influencer for evidence and what you can do if you don't get a sufficient response, those kind of things. Some of the things that they've been involved in, they were involved in an Ask for Evidence claim where Vision Express employee told one of their customers that their eyesight would deteriorate if they didn't get glasses. And the person asked for the evidence behind that claim to Vision Express, and there wasn't any. So Vision Express was really good about it and implemented a training program for their optometrists and really responded really well to that. There's a number of other kind of examples on their website, such as a drinkable sunscreen, which is obviously not available. Other ways that kind of other organisations that we can ask for evidence, so this is a really new one. So there's an organisation called Full Fact, which is an independent government-backed organisation which looks at claims in the media. So recently they called out the Daily Express for saying that coronavirus may have been genetically engineered. And this is one of those ones where it is someone you never know whether it's kind of deliberate or not, but it's misinterpreting quite a complex kind of scientific article. And basically it was based on this study which showed that it compared the genome sequence of the current coronavirus to previous coronavirus outbreaks such as MERS and SARS, SARS-1, and suggested that it had some comparative genetic material, but that it had some differences which suggested that it may be more effective at spreading. But crucially, this doesn't mean that it had been tampered with, and genetic engineering has to have been deliberately tampered with by humans. So that's kind of another organisation that is out there kind of calling out people, and that people can access to help them call out these claims. One of the really good things that Ask for Evidence does is these understanding evidence pages, and they have them for pretty much any theme that you can think of, specifically kind of for us, interesting things about kind of health and medicine. There's things about randomized control trials, about looking at scientific articles and what things to look out for when you're looking at these types of evidence, either in the public or in kind of medical literature. And it goes through the kind of hierarchy of evidence, what to look out for in terms of the different kinds of evidence that you're looking at. So you'll have different things that you need to look at if you're looking at kind of survey data or data that's based on kind of publicly available information, such as things from the NHS or from government records, whereas when you're looking at things from medical or academic research, you'll have different things that you then need to look at. It goes through looking at sample size, crucially looking at the funder, because that's always a big one. So those are really, really helpful, and are freely available on their website. There's another really good tool, which is the Understanding Health Research tool. And this is a kind of step-by-step guide where you can put in the key components of a piece of research, and it's funded and hosted by the MRC, which is the Medical Research Council, and the Social and Public Health Sciences Unit. And you can put in, they ask you for key information from the piece of research that you're looking at, and then we'll give you kind of an output on where the biases might be, what kind of limitations the research might have, those kind of things. Because one of the things with research is it's never going to be 100% perfect. There's always going to be some things that either are skewed to a certain way, or there's going to be certain biases or things that have missed out. And as researchers, what we need to be really clear about, and what we need to do, and what I've learned definitely from coming out of academia and moving into kind of the third sector, is that one of the most important things is not do a piece of research because it might have a bias or a limitation, or not release that research or not have confidence in that research, but to say where the limitations are and what the biases might be. So for us, especially when we're contacting our community, we are always crucially aware that we might have a very engaged part of the sector. Charities as a whole do have a problem with reaching kind of underrepresented groups, and those kind of things. So when we're putting out our research, we're always really clear and upfront about what we think are kind of the biases, where we think the limitations might be and where the skew might be, and trying to get other pieces of evidence to validate that. But then that leads you into another thing of having to report their biases as well. So, which is really easy to do in, well, not really easy, but it's easier to do in kind of long form reports, where we're producing kind of evidence reports, and we've got the space and time to be able to put that information in. It becomes more difficult for influencing reports and also press. So we have to be really careful with the language that we use when we're using it for press. And just, there are no hard and fast rules for that. It's just kind of making sure that you're checking that claim all the time and making sure that you're not making a false claim, and wherever possible referencing back to the full report where people can find that information and make that decision themselves. So that's another really useful tool. And then the last one I wanted to flag was Nesta. And if no one's come across this, Nesta is like an independent think tanky kind of organisation that also hosts the Alliance for Useful Evidence, which can be quite dry and quite like academic-y and jargony, but they do really look at kind of the standards for evidence, and they do have a short video on the hierarchy of evidence, which I was going to play. Let me see if this works. Can you hear that? You can't hear?
This answer that all-important
Here it
question.
now.
Is an innovation actually doing any good?
Can you hear that?
It's a robust framework that helps evaluate an innovation in 5 steps. Step 1, describe what positive difference an innovation is going to make. This is called a theory of change. Step 2, capture data that shows there is a positive difference that can be measured. Step 3, by testing with comparison groups, prove that the positive difference is because of the innovation rather than coincidental. Step 4, get other people to prove the same thing. And finally, step 5, make sure the innovation can be replicated elsewhere. If a smart idea worked in Copenhagen or Cardiff, will it work in Paris or Prague? We've pioneered standards of evidence at Nesta, and we're the first innovation body in the world to create this kind of framework. We champion its use in creating more impactful social policy. Our standards of evidence have helped prove what works and what doesn't, so that innovation can change the world for good.
So they're talking about their 5 kind of standards of evidence, and when we're kind of looking at a project or an intervention or trying to evaluate an intervention, that's one of the things that we kind of think about. And it doesn't mean that you always have to reach that top standard of evidence, but it's just making sure that the standard of evidence that people do reach in reports for on interventions and those kind of things is appropriate for the piece of research that they're doing, and answers, crucially from that, I think answers the question that they need to ask, and isn't kind of extrapolating from one side to the other. Okay, so, and then the last thing I wanted to talk about quickly was just how we use evidence to influence, and this kind of leads on a little bit from that Nesta thing. So the first question we kind of think about is, what is your end goal? What do you want to get out of this piece of influencing? So do you want to influence a positive policy change? Are you trying to influence government or decision makers? Are you trying to raise awareness? So if you're trying to raise awareness of an issue, then it might be, you might be leaning more towards kind of case study or qualitative qualitative information, more kind of emotive stories, rather than where you might be needing, you know, very strong numbers with very high kind of sample size for influencing policy change. Are you trying to implement a local intervention? So is it something that's happening on that you want to change on a small scale, very localized, in which case you might want to look at other interventions that have worked elsewhere where the population or the issue is similar. Or are you trying to improve engagement or uptake for a certain intervention or certain strategy? Who do you need to influence? So identifying who all the stakeholders are when you first set out, and engaging those as early as possible, so that you can not change your strategy, but make sure that you're addressing the questions that people are asking with the evidence that you're providing. And crucially, who or what are the barriers that could block your positive outcomes? So getting those negative or less kind of easily, those people who are less going to be easily on board, identified early. One of the big things that I find really useful is identifying your friendly supporters. So identifying those people who are going to help you get to the end point that you want to get. So who's already interested in the issue? Who's already talking about it? What are the conflicts of interest that kind of stakeholders might have? So how can the people that are friendly to you help you frame your argument for your audience? And who says what matters? So if you're trying to implement like a change in kind of NICE guidelines, then, you know, you're going to need specific people to speak out against that, which will have more impact than certain other people. And then what evidence do you need? And then you can move on to what evidence you need to support your position. So what are the assumptions you're trying to prove? Lay those out really early. Where will the evidence come from? So are you going to run your own data collection project? Are you getting it? Is it already available somewhere else? Do you need to engage someone to get that evidence? Is there good examples of where this has worked before that really helps if someone's done it even in another condition or another industry? How did they do it? How has it worked? What has been the impact? And identify your expert advisors. It's really useful to have people to critique your evidence and also help you with the evidence gathering or the evidence analysis. And then Hannah will talk a lot more about this, I'm sure, but identify your moments. So develop a plan for when to present your evidence that will have the most impact. Coordinate with other stakeholders. You don't want to be launching something at the same time as something else. And use stories to tell the impact that the change could have on people. People respond to that. So that's it really, that's my talk. I just lastly wanted to say that as a lot of people are at home with children at the moment, and even when we're not at home, it's important. But Ask for Evidence has an evidence hunter activity pack where we are trying to help children to develop critical thinking skills and go through it goes through kind of how to critically evaluate on social media. And they've just launched a collaboration with Mumsnet this week. So with the evidence hunter pack. So there's a bunch of resources out there. So that might occupy them for a couple of hours. So that's it. Yeah. So get involved, ask for evidence. And yeah, there's a bunch of evidence ambassadors across the country. So if you have another group that you would think would be interested in hearing about Ask for Evidence, then please let us know and we can come out. And that's it. That's me.
Thank you, Brooke. That was really interesting. And that talk was a whole sort of different side of the Ask for Evidence work that we saw from our previous speaker, Liam, when he came and spoke from Ask for the Evidence a couple of years ago, and he was talking probably very much about the content that we can find in the evidence activity pack. So how to know when you're looking at evidence, on social media or online, how to sort of evaluate whether or not that's likely to be reliable. And I think that's probably a whole other session that we could maybe do another time. So this one has been very much about how we as an organisation and other thyroid patient organisations and all of us working in partnership can actually use existing evidence and gather new evidence in ways that will be impactful. So I thought that was incredibly useful, and thank you for talking about NICE, because that has been a big struggle for all of us in recent months. Does anybody have any questions or any observations on Brooke's talk? We can start the Q&A session. You can type in the chat if there's anything that you want to say, or we can move straight on and I can talk about what the Thyroid Trust have been doing with our partners from an advocacy perspective, and maybe bring in some of the other people who are on the chat who've got a lot of experience as well, and people like Mary Newton and Lynn Minot might have something to contribute to the conversation. I'm just looking at the chat to see if anybody's waving or asking anything, and it doesn't look like anyone is, so we'll move on. Thank you so much, Brooke. That was a great talk. Will we be able to share those slides with people afterwards, as well as the video link?
Sorry, just unmuting myself. Yeah, I can share the slides. That's I put the links to all of those organisations in the slides for that reason. So yeah, I can share them. And if anyone has any questions after this, I'm happy to take questions by email or whatever as well. Yeah, fantastic. I mean, one of the things that really jumped out at me was, for example, we were talking about NICE, and what was it, the wording you used? Who says what matters? So there's been a big issue that thyroid patients have in talking about our own experiences and signposting to research that has been done, talking about sort of patient reported outcomes, what patients say about treatments that are more effective and less effective for them. And it was very, very frustrating with the new NICE guideline that has just been completed recently, that they only looked at a very particular type of evidence, which really didn't include giving much regard to patient experiences. And so when you were saying if you get the right sort of people to speak out against the evidence that they're using, it might carry more weight than purely patients' voices. What sort of people would you have in mind for that? Who do you think we could have maybe been getting on side? So when we engage with NICE, we tend to use kind of a mosaic of evidence, if you like. So we do use some of our own evidence that we generate internally in terms of surveys that we use. We also access kind of publicly available data from kind of the NHS and the DWP, so depending on what the impact will be. We do use academic information if it's there. It's not always there and it's not always appropriate. And then engaging with, so we have, obviously we have the Association of British Neurologists, so the ABN, which there is the Association of Thyroid
there's
Clinicians.
the British Thyroid Association, who we work with very closely and who've advised a lot of the work that I'm going to talk about we've done. Yeah, so we engage with them, and then we also have a smaller group of kind of medical advisors that we pass things through, and that will give us kind of a more clear, maybe more frank kind of guidance on things like that. So those are the kind of things that we use in terms of like patient information or patient stories. We do use case studies, but we use them to kind of personalize larger numbers. So if we can have data that
represents, you're never going to get a fully representative. I mean, unless you're, you know, certain conditions, you're less likely to get fully representative numbers. But as I said, like having something that covers a larger population, explaining the biases, and then hopefully having input from medical advisors is kind of the way that we bring it all together into like one kind of story.
So it's disappointing that the NHS doesn't really seem to have conducted any research into thyroid conditions, despite the fact that levothyroxine, which is the most common treatment for the most common thyroid condition, is the third most expensive medicine to the NHS. So you'd think they would want to understand better how effective it's being in helping people, and you know, everybody who has an underactive thyroid gets their prescriptions for free. So there's a lot of money to the NHS, and you know, if people were less unwell, if their conditions were better managed, then they would be able to sort of contribute better to society, and not necessarily, you know, be contributing economically, for example. There's one lady who shared her experience with us, who has an underactive thyroid, who was very unwell for a long time and effectively wholly disabled, who, now that her condition is well managed, she's not only sort of having a much better quality of life, but she's running a business and she's employing people. So you think that sort of evidence would be something that the Department of Work and Pensions and NHS would want to know about and would want to be capturing. But at the moment, it just seems that thyroid patients are a very overlooked group, if you like, and it's been very difficult to get those kind of organisations to take that sort of work on board. So what would your sort of advice be about changing that?
Yeah, it's really hard because they're really unlikely to take single stories as like as a piece of evidence. So do you know, obviously I don't know the thyroid landscape that well, but are there kind of clinicians or researchers out there that are doing that? What I would be doing is looking for clinicians or researchers out there that are doing kind of smaller scale studies in their own populations, in their own kind of clinics or treatment populations, and looking to see whether we could create some kind of map of what's going on in individual studies that might be smaller and might not have much impact on their own. But if there are kind of repeated stories over kind of repeated investigations, then potentially that would give more weight to something like that. Obviously you have to be really careful about the claims that you're making and those kind of things, but putting it together into kind of a list of studies is really useful. One of the things that we're really lucky, the MS Society, is we are a research funder, so we are able to kind of marry our research and influencing, and I know that it makes it more difficult if you don't have that kind of side of it. So we have the MS register as well, and I don't know if there's anything out there similar for kind of thyroid patients, but the MS register allows us to access a really large number of people with MS and kind of check things with them regularly to get a picture of what's going on. So that's really helpful for us. But I think on kind of a smaller scale, that's what I would be doing first, is to try and map the studies that are going on, or the evidence that we do have, and see what kind of a picture we could make and where the gaps are and where it might be most impactful for us to intervene in terms of generating evidence or influencing evidence generation. In that kind of and there are smaller, so like the NHRI does kind of smaller social studies grants and stuff like that, where they do support smaller kind of seed funding of smaller studies. But you would need kind of a clinician or some kind of research person on board with that to be interested in doing that. But yeah, mapping would probably be my first point of call on that.
No, great. And I think we've done, certainly not just the Thyroid Trust, but all of the different thyroid groups over the years, have done quite a bit of that, and we know about quite a lot of evidence that seems to be robust, and even some quite large sample sizes. And yet getting NICE to take it seriously was very, very problematic.
Yeah.
We have started to develop a registry of patients,
Great.
and we're looking for an academic to work with us specifically on developing that, which would be interesting.
Yeah, definitely. That would be amazing.